Five Star Christmas is a 2020 Hallmark film directed by Christie Wolfe, and this stars Bethany Joy Lenz as Lucy, and we also have the brilliant Brazeau as Walter Ralston, and I particularly enjoyed his character. I thought he was brilliant. Lucy, on the other hand, was a pain, and I did not like her, and she does display some unfavourable characteristics to begin with, and these are things from which she learns and improves and goes through character developments, and I completely see the benefit and education in that, but I just found her so annoying that it was kind of hard to get on board with the narrative, which was mostly told from her perspective. Or at least for the most part, it focuses on her family. And basically, she goes home for Christmas, as the rest of her siblings are, and she realizes that her father has actually turned her childhood home into a bed and breakfast. And yes, that's going to come as a shock, but she seemed to display very selfish behaviour straight away. And that's not just because she was emotional and kind of shocked at the change. She just seemed to overreact, and compared to how the rest of her siblings reacted, I think it was hard to get on board with her after that point, because she displayed such unfavourable behaviour. But she does come round quite quickly, maybe a little bit too quickly, actually, for her behaviour to be believable. But nevertheless, she comes round to it and realises that if this is what makes her father happy, then that's fine with her. And she suddenly gets it in her head that maybe this secret writer who goes around reviewing B&Bs might just happen upon this B&B and stay there over Christmas and review it and get her father some customers. And by massive coincidence, she believes that this person has just arrived. And this is a huge coincidence, and it was very hard for me to kind of believe the narrative at this point, that they would suddenly discuss this and all of a sudden, poof, out of nowhere, here's this person. But once you get past that and realise that it's a Hallmark Christmas film, it's not meant to be that complex. The family start taking on roles of guests and people who work at the hotel, pretending they're not related so that they can give this mystery guest a wonderful vacation. And it's really cringy at that point, and I feel like the characters' behaviours are just so unrealistic. Nobody would act that extremely when trying to convince somebody that they're somebody else. It goes so far over the top that it's unbelievable. And I did have a real problem with the characters in this. Not with the acting. I think the acting is very good. But the actual characters' actions, I just felt were completely unrealistic and did not work well for me. It felt really cheesy and really corny. The only one that I think maybe worked well was Paula Shaw performing as Margo, who was blatantly over the top. She was meant to be over the top and not necessarily convincing, and somehow that made it convincing. She just seemed like a very charismatic character, so you could believe it. But the other characters just took it to the extreme where it wasn't believable, and I felt like if they thought that's how they should act, they need to maybe reassess what they're doing, because it's not convincing, and the film shouldn't have lasted as long as it did because nobody would believe their performances. Nevertheless, I was curious to find out what would happen, and it became quite obvious. I'd say maybe halfway through I kind of twigged what was going on, or I guess I had a suspicion, and my suspicion was confirmed, so it was very predictable as well. And Hallmark films are not meant to be full of surprises, but when you're going to be throwing curveballs, you shouldn't make them too obvious too early on. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it. It's delightful in some ways. I particularly liked the character of Beth Thompson, played by Laura Soltis. I don't know why I can't talk today. I keep mumbling my words. I particularly liked that character. So the characters that I liked drove this forward. But so many of the characters were kind of obnoxious, unrealistic, and I didn't really believe them. And that causes problems. Certainly when the narrative is not that interesting. I was kind of curious to see what would happen, but it wasn't that interesting that even with bad characters it could carry itself. It was clunky. Was it that festive? Kind of. It's not the most festive Hallmark Christmas film, which is a shame because a lot of their films are very festive, very jolly, a lot of fun, and will get you in the Christmas spirit. Although it did make me want to pull taffy. I've never done that before. I don't even know if there's anywhere in the UK where we could do that. But it did inspire me to maybe eventually look at pulling taffy. Five Star Christmas is a bit of a mess. It's not very well, the characters aren't very well written, some of the characters, which is weird because the characters that I like were really well written. And it's kind of like they put all of the effort into those characters and neglected making believable behaviour in the other characters. I don't know. The narrative itself, when it was not obvious, was quite interesting. But, and to be honest, when I realised that something was not as it seemed was literally about 5 minutes after we met a certain character. It became so obvious. So it's a shame because it had a really interesting premise that could have been really fascinating. I was mildly curious, but unfortunately some really bad character writing really let this film down.